So welcome, our beloved colleague, Melanie. We really appreciate your leadership. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by acknowledging our creator, the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Melanie, please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work.
Oh, thanks, Victor. And thank you so much for having me. I saw the list of interviews before and I was like, excited to be online with you today. Thanks for the way that you opened this call. And so my name is Melanie Thomas. I'm calling today from my home where I live, work, and play on Treaty 13 territory, traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, also known as Toronto. And I appreciate your opening because you talked about ancestors. So I have to say, going back to a little bit of my roots, I was born and raised on Treaty 4 territory. It's the original lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and homeland of the Métis, also known as Regina, Saskatchewan. And so that's where I was born and raised. People wouldn't always think that with the skin tone that I have, but I'm a daughter of immigrants, like so many people in Canada. That's also my story. So my parents left the coastlines and the coconut trees of India, Malaysia, and headed to the prairies, which if you've been to Regina coming up November, December, it is cold. So they gave up the flip-flops for the boots. And that's where I was born and raised. And growing up at that time in Regina, there wasn't a huge amount of immigration. So those of us who, like I say, have a little extra melatonin, a little extra pigmentation in our skin, we stood out. We stood out in our community. And so the questions growing up around belonging and identity and family, like I had my immediate family, but no one beyond my immediate family. So what does family look like when people don't share your heritage or share your looks or share your food, but you can create genuine sense of family? All of that was part of my upbringing, as it is for so many others. And so at CFC, our purpose is to relentlessly pursue a future where everyone belongs. And that purpose just resonates so much for me because I have felt belonging with people who do not look like me or share my heritage. And there are other times I have not felt like I belonged. And so that really is the North Star that I wake up on a Monday morning thinking about in our work. And I'm so privileged that at CFC, we don't have to do it alone. We have this amazing network of over 200 community foundations in over 90% of Canada. And we have hundreds of partners like Victor, yourself, and your colleagues at Setsi, so many others to say, hey, we believe in belonging, genuine belonging, not the lowest common denominator, but like celebrating our differences. And how are we going to make the changes in Canada to make that happen? So, I just kind of feel like I hit the jackpot doing this type of work, to wake up on a Monday morning getting to do this type of work.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. You have so many, we did an incredible interview with Andrea. I've been connected with Andrew for very long time. Genevieve, Michelle Baldwin, Allison, Sarah Trudeau. There's so many folks on the CFC team that I've connected with, and they always say you can tell the culture of an organization by how the staff feel on a Sunday nights or on a Monday morning. And I think as a partner of CFC, it reigns true, all those sentiments. So once again, I give thanks for your remarkable leadership, candor, and just the level of love and genuine leadership you all bring to this work. Really appreciate you and all the space that you hold in the ecosystem. Thank you. Yeah. So much.
Can I say those same words back to you? Can I just do a ditto back to you and your team, Victor?
I receive. We receive. Yeah. So my next question is, what inspires you most about your work?
So before CFC, I came from the corporate sector. So I came from law, and I spent a bit of time in banking, and I got trained in business school and law school. And if I think about the topics that we have worked on over the last few years, gender equality, social finance, social enterprise, community infrastructure, emergency response funding, like any of those topics in school or in my, first couple jobs, if there was a lunch and learn on those topics, like I would have been there. I would have been there, like front row. I want to learn about this. And so honestly, to be able to do that type of work at a national level, but with a local infrastructure, and to do that with people who've been in this work, some are new and young, and they bring like the vibrancy of youth to the conversation, but others who've spent their lives working in these areas like gender equality, like social finance, and to learn from them and to think about what could be community philanthropy's role in this. Like, that's what inspires me. Like the topics that we work on, I really sometimes feel like, oh my goodness, I would have been spending my evening hours, my weekend hours, my volunteer hours to be in these rooms with these people. And here I am during work hours, getting to work and learn alongside them. And then I think the challenge comes with saying, okay, so what's our role? Should we be in this conversation? If so, what's our role? Not an easy one, not an easy conversation all the time.
No, it's so funny you say that. Before I met my wife, in my teenage years, we did a lot of community organizing, and literally I worked in a company, and we used to use the photocopier for our real work, which was community work on the side. And when I think back on those days, now it is inspiring to be able to do this work full time and to be able to contribute in ways that make sense, and also yeah, so that really resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of folks of you. And so thank you once again for your candor and transparency. So my next question is, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and what are some of the approaches that you and your colleagues are using to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
Yeah, I mean, one of it's just, kind of building off of the last piece is we're talking about such complex issues, like such long-standing issues that have whole systems built to uphold them. And I do think it can be challenging to think about, okay, well, what's our role? Like, what's our role? How do we, move this forward in the direction that we want it to go? And so, if I think about our work like gender equality, like that's just that phrase, like gender equality. And we've been talking about it in modern society since when, right? It's pervasive in every aspect of our life and work. And then we say, okay, well, what does CFC and community foundations do? And I think, the approach in that work has largely been looking at ourselves, learning about us at an individual, us at an institutional level, policies, practices we need to change, and working in conjunction with community and supporting, gender equality organizations, working, boots on the ground in community, and like, let's move our investments that's aligned and supportive of gender equality. And so I think there can be really interesting aspects of like, what do we do when we're thinking about a huge topic like gender equality? But it takes moments to actually stop and be like, kind of interrogate that question of what can we do, and learning from our previous work and bringing in friends and colleagues to kind of push us on, hey, here's opportunities that CFC could show up and support. But I think that, take any topic, and that's definitely a challenge. I'm very grateful for the partners and the team that you mentioned. Like, those are just a few of many colleagues at CFC that bring their whole brain and their whole heart to work to think through this. Another challenge, which I've seen come up for several years, and I don't think I've cracked the nut on it, but it's something that we keep pushing, is this at times tension between equity and wanting to work in an equitable way and time and the constraints of time. And I share that because it's just been, there's been so many nights it's kept me awake of like, we want to do this work in an equitable way. We want to do the consultation. We want to do the design process. We want to bring in, community leaders to sit with us. And there's these constraints of time, fiscal year, spending, where it's like, oh, well, what gets cut? And I think, being at CFC and doing this work for almost 6 years now, we don't win all the tensions between those two, but I think we need to ask, like, are those constraints real? Are those constraints real, or are there things that we put on ourselves? And if they're real, are there ways to change it? And the piece on where do we advocate for change? Where do we really tell the story of what gets lost when we don't take an equitable approach to our work, when we rush instead of doing the groundwork first? And there have been some wins and there have been losses in that, but I do think that that story of community and the need for equitable approach, and really what does that look like in practice in our work as funders and as a network, is moving forward, but not as fast as I would like to. So that continues to be a barrier. And then the last thing I'd share is, I think all this work, when we're talking about, you know, how we want Canada to function and reconciliation and what does the future look like of belonging and climate change, like, again, these are such big topics and they can feel paralyzing to me. I can feel paralyzed. And I think one of the barriers for us to really come to terms with ourselves, like, how do I change? What are the behaviors I need to change? What are the ingrained biases that I have? And it's almost easier, I think, to talk at an institutional level. Like, this is what the institution needs to change. It's really hard to change our own ways of working and ways of being. And so I'm grateful for the moments of reflection. I'm grateful for the moments of training. I'm grateful for the moments of sharing inside of CFC and outside of CFC to start changing ourselves in the direction of the work that we want to see happen. So I don't know. How do you feel about that question, Victor? Like, what are the barriers that you see in the work?
I think that the deep introspection you're doing just around capacity, bandwidth, and just the work is the work. Our colleague, beloved colleague, Larissa Crawford, founder of Future Ancestors, has a beautiful statement, position paper, and thoughts around the decolonization of time. And when you mention that piece around time and equity and approaching it, I think that once again it speaks to the level of introspection that you're doing as an individual in the ecosystem, which brings such value, but more importantly, the level of reflection, introspection, and systems change work that CFC is doing as an organization with 205 locations and some serious resources to be implemented. And I think a lot of times when I think about decolonization of time or these paradigms, I definitely think we need to find ways it needs to have radical empathy, grace, and compassion for ourselves and for others. So definitely a lot of those challenges and the ways you're approaching them, I think, are not just radical, but important. Because a lot of times when we think about revolutionary activity, it's almost like revolutions are colonized, you know? Like, there's tropes, there's virtue signaling, there's all this. So when you meet folks that operate from a space of deep sincerity, authenticity, transparency, I personally cling to them. I steward and honor and really value those relationships, and we've had that relationship from day one. And as well, in terms of the way CFC's approach work, at least from what I've seen personally and the Setsi team personally has seen, it's clear that it's much deeper than systems change work. It's on a personal level. Like, every staff is trying to be their personal best and bring their personal best, and operating from what I see at the pace of community. And sometimes institutions, organizations, especially ones that are very large, can't always get it right. And I think that's where we need that deep and radical empathy, grace, and compassion, and mercy for each other and for the work. Because no matter what, these are intergenerational struggles. Like, no one woke up today and discovered climate issues or environmental racism or systemic racism. These are intergenerational struggles. And my hat's off to you and your team, and just the way that you were able to frame some of those challenges and the way you're approaching those challenges. So once again, on a Setsi front, I think we wrestle with the same thing: capacity, bandwidth, the ability to say no when we want to say yes, the ability to say yes, and being able to balance the yes with all the competing interests of community and all the competing priorities that come up just sporadically. You know, we could be in the middle of a project and wow, there's an issue around asylum seekers. We're in the middle of a priority and there's a consultation needs to be done, or there's a community that needs to be served. So I think that once again, in this season, we have to have radical empathy, grace, compassion, and mercy for each other and for the organizations we represent, because this work is not 37.5 hours. Like folks go to bed thinking about this work, they wake up thinking about this work. I'm not saying it's 24 hours, but for some of us, it's damn near close. Yeah. So once again,
Absolutely.
I salute you and everything that you do and everything you stand for and all those that you support and help, family. I really appreciate you. Yeah.
Well, thanks, babe. And I have to say, like, it's a learning and unlearning. And at CFC, because we sit in like sometimes this intermediary, this broker role, it's challenging because you're, 200 community foundations, groups like the Government of Canada, which is this big institution, partners, other local community members, and you sit in that space. And so it's in no way do I want to share that we have it right, but it's this process that we're on of, okay, what happened? What will we do next time? Is there anything we can do now to start shifting things? Let me check in on myself. How did I show up? What, like and that takes work. That takes emotional work and time to do it. But that is, I'm very grateful for, like I said, the colleagues get to work with who teach me, right? We learn together in how to do this better.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let me ask you more of a systems level question. How do you feel? And what are your thoughts around the future of philanthropy in Canada?
I feeling very optimistic today, Victor. And so I am so excited about the future of philanthropy. Like, I am more excited right now than I have been in the last 6 years. I see coming out of COVID and really the needs and the gaps that were so exposed during that time. I think emerging out of this are, different ways of leadership, new styles of leadership. Both individuals that are showing up as leaders and institutions. And so at a national philanthropic landscape, I am so inspired by the Foundation for Black Communities. I'm so inspired by the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. Like, first of all, how did it take us this long for Canada to have this type of institutional leadership? But it's here now. And I think that the face of philanthropy is changing, but I think more importantly, because it's not tokenism, it's the way philanthropy works is changing. I do believe it is showing to be different and will continue to be different when those from the community who they're serving their own community and what the difference that makes. And so I'm excited to watch both for CFC and others to see how those different ways of working and showing up in community will impact the rest of philanthropy. So, and then who's a new set of leaders and institutions that are going to keep rising up, to shift things forward. So I'm very glad we're having this conversation today in 2023, because I don't know what I would have said a few years ago, but I genuinely, I'm feeling really optimistic about changes that will be coming and are happening right now.
That's beautiful and remarkable. And I have to be an optimist. My wife always tells me, like, we have 4 children. We don't have a choice. We have to be optimists in terms of
have to be optimistic.
This work, because we have babies, grandbabies coming, I'm sure,
right.
and children. Right. So the future has to be bright, or else what's the point? So I really appreciate that. And once again, I agree completely in terms of the new and then the nascent leadership on an institutional level that's manifesting and being actualized, which is so remarkable, so deeply needed. Those credible messengers, cultural considerations of care, culturally appropriate capital, which sounds crazy, but not all money is good money, at least to some communities and to elders and stalwarts in our community. So that these concepts of cultural appropriate capital and credible messengers, so important. Once again, I thank you for your leadership. My next question is, what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
I have to, like, the ultimate goal, I have to say, is that genuine sense of belonging. Like that, like in Canada, really for those in community feel like I belong and I don't have to shift and change to some sort of mold of it, but I can be who I am in Canada. And so now what does success look like? And we're, at CFC, we're developing kind of our own internal metrics of what that will look like in the scope of Community Foundations of Canada. So I think we're in the process of really unpacking, like, at a further level of what does belonging mean and look like in our work. So I don't have a great, perfect, polished answer for that, but it's an active conversation in our organization, so that we're not just saying words that don't have weight, but we're saying words that have some specifics behind it that we can work towards. But that is the driving force at CFC. That's the driving force to our work is belonging.
Absolutely. I feel like the sector has moved from these concepts of DEI and EDI to J, justice, access, inclusion, to now really understanding and unpacking belonging in a different way. And I think that leaders like yourself bringing that up consistently and actually like living it, not just like the practical application of what belonging looks like, I think is so important as opposed to just a theoretical principle and the sentiments. So once again, I appreciate your leadership. So we're up at the second last question. Do you have any words of wisdom or guidance for emerging leaders in our community coming up right now?
Man, I have some thoughts for emerging leaders. I would say one is to have the best support system possible around you, like really deep support system. Prioritize people. And I think it's often we can prioritize tasks, we can prioritize deadlines, we can prioritize opportunities, but how do we personally, professionally prioritize people? Because that's what the longevity is going to come from is those relationships. And I say this, I wouldn't even say this just for emerging leaders. I'd probably say this for everyone. But to show up in a learning mindset, like to show up as a student rather than the teacher, and it's not to say we don't have valuable contributions to put on the table and add, but really to have a mindset of being a sponge. Like, what can I learn from those around me? What's something that's going to be shared that's going to shift my thinking? And I think especially when we're in that emerging space, sometimes, I kind of laugh at our society loves our top 30 under 30 list, top 40 under 40, like kind of like forget all that, like forget the lists, because that can push us in a mindset of like, I need to achieve. I need to like check off these boxes of achievement because that then means something. When in reality, it's like, God willing, I will have a long life. And in the scope of life, like what relationships have I formed and what have I learned? And then what have I contributed? And so, yeah, whether that's emerging leaders, I mean, for myself, I'll share that I really kind of put that as I start the year and we're coming to the end of this year. And as I start the next year of how do I show up in a learning mode? And how do I take opportunities as training for, I don't know what's next, but training to then keep growing and moving forward. So if I was talking to someone who is much younger than me, I'd say like, forget the lists, just like show up to learn, look for opportunities to learn and say yes.
That's absolutely beautiful. Don't prioritize the tasks, the deadlines and opportunities, prioritize people. One of my elders, Dr. Charmaine Marine, she was one of the founders of the Marcus Garvey Center for Leadership Education, one of the buildings my wife and I met at many, many years ago, over 20 years ago. She passed away many years ago, and she had this remarkable model of she would remember the littlest things about everyone she met. Like she remember your children's names, where you're from, your dog's name, birthday. And this was such a remarkable thing that I noticed about her. And she'd meet you one time, but remember 3 or 4 things and ask the right questions. And when you just mentioned that piece around not prioritizing always the task, the deadline, the opportunity, but prioritizing people, I think some of us do that innately. But I think in terms of young leaders, especially in an ecosystem so hyper competitive and has like a very maximalism framework around opportunity acquisition, that's some incredible advice. So we give thanks. And
so hard. I think about my day to day and I'm like, am I prioritizing people today or am I prioritizing tasks? So it's like this continuous check-in, because actually like the beautiful thing is where people are prioritized, where the relationships exist, the tasks get done, the work gets done in a much more longevity, sustainable, deep, meaningful way. But it's hard to see that when you're feeling the pressure of a day. Hard to see that sometimes. I find it, I struggle with that.
Absolutely. So feeling the pressure of the year, the season, the quarter, let alone the day. So no, I'm walking with you completely. Yeah, it's an unlearning and a relearning and a journey. So our last question is, do you have any calls to action for our listeners and viewers or closing thoughts?
I just want to share so much thanks and gratitude for the invitation, for getting to chat with you, Victor, whether it's recorded or not recorded. I want to chat with you anytime. So I appreciate this time that you've put aside for me. And I think that, my call to action would be just to build relationships, Like, just like, oh my goodness, if we can build genuine, meaningful, authentic relationships without the hidden agendas, without the like playing the chess game, like just throw the game away and just, who is this person? Who are you? Am I privileged enough that you're going to share your story with me? Can I get to know you? Like, what ripple effects and change that will make in the work and the way we work, but also the actual outcomes. I really believe in that. I really believe that in my life, when I hit high moments and low moments, I pick up the phone and I call people. And imagine if we treated that way in our workspace of like, who are you people that you're going to call? And so that's just simple call to action is let's invest in people. Let's invest in relationships in a real way.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Melanie, we give thanks. We give thanks. And we'll close this interview the way we began, by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on, by acknowledging all our ancestors, by acknowledging all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Melanie, for all you do for so many. We so appreciate you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for having me. This was so uplifting today. Thank you.